Australian Human Rights Commission is that you get invited to meet with a lot of people in their communities. Last year I was invited to visit Newcastle Lagoon, an Aboriginal town camp on the outskirts of Darwin. What I saw there is indelibly printed in my memory. I saw overcrowded, dilapidated, dirty houses. Most of the houses that I entered had all of the mattresses pushed into the centre of the largest room of the house, the living room, because that was the only place where they could be sure the rain wouldn't come in through the broken louvers. I saw a running kitchen tap that I'd been told would be running at what appeared to be full gush for more than 12 months, despite repeated requests of the landlord to whom commercial rent was being paid to fix the tap. Nowhere in any house that I entered did I see a place suitable for a student to study or even to quietly read. At least part of the explanation for the overcrowding was that there'd been an influx of people from more remote communities seeking to escape the most significant effects of the Northern Territory intervention, and in particular the alcohol restrictions. Although Lucky's Lagoon was a prescribed area, if you live on the outskirts of Darwin, it's not hard to avoid the alcohol restrictions. Although nearly everything that I saw in this community distressed me, what particularly distressed me was that Australian children could be being raised in such conditions of inequality. The idea that the children of Lucky's Lagoon were growing up with comparable choices and opportunities to fulfil their potential as children in, for example, nearby Fanny Bay, was simply fanciful. More recently, I was privileged to be invited to attend the Gama Festival in far northeast Darwin. For the last 2 years, this festival, which has a longer history, but for the last 2 years it's been organised by the Yothu Foundation. This foundation is established by community leaders and persons of influence in the 5 clans that make up the Lollywood people of this region. While at Gama, I met inspiring, well-educated and authoritative leaders of the Aboriginal community, not only from that area but from other parts of Australia. They were concerned to improve the health and well-being of Lollywood people and other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. In contrast with those I met at Lucky's Lagoon, they were impressive, educated and empowered citizens. Their empowerment was perhaps best illustrated by the fact that while we were there, they hosted a visit by the President of Timor-Leste. He came to sign an agreement for economic development between the people of Timor-Leste and those of Northeast Arnhem. I was also impressed by the vibrant display of Lollywood culture, and also, in fact, by the quite impressive contribution that local Aboriginal people are obviously making to modern Australian culture, particularly through music. Nonetheless, I was saddened to hear from the leaders I spoke to of their frustration and disappointment about the ongoing disadvantage that their communities continue to face around Australia, and their concern about the impacts of the paternalistic approaches being adopted by successive governments towards their people. Plainly, they don't believe that the voice of Indigenous Australians are being adequately heard in Canberra. Now, I use these 2 stories to illustrate continuing inequalities experienced within our democracy. They're inequalities of varying degrees, but they are experiences of inequality. Inequality, of course, is not a uniquely Aboriginal experience, and I'll speak later of other inequalities. But my real purpose this evening, is to explore why equality matters in a democratic society such as Australia. Equality is both a fundamental human right and a founding principle of modern democracy. And research shows that equality itself is a force for social good. But our democratic institutions don't always protect us against inequality. What I want to suggest is that to reduce inequality, we need empowered citizens. Citizens empowered with knowledge about their rights and the rights of others, and empowered by possession of the skills necessary to engage in democratic processes. So let me start with just some brief observations about the human rights to equality and non-discrimination. In many ways, the cornerstones of human rights. And the importance of these rights is demonstrated by the fact that most, if not all, international instruments that seek to protect human rights protect the right to be free from discrimination. Rather than consider at length the articulation of these concepts in international human rights discourse, I would like to concentrate on their importance to democracy. In describing the right to equality before the law, Nelson Mandela articulated the concept in this way. In its proper meaning, he said, equality before the law means the right to participate in the making of the laws by which one is governed, a constitution which guarantees democratic rights to all sections of the population, the right to approach the court for protection or relief in the case of the violation of rights guaranteed in the Constitution, and the right to take part in the administration of justice as judges, magistrates, attorney general, law advisors, and similar positions. More emotionally put, equality is also the realisation of the dream of Martin Luther King, who spoke of his 4 children, of the dream he had of his 4 children living one day in a nation where they would be judged not by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. As Martin Luther King well understood, it's not only equality before the law in the strict sense to which we should aspire. Rather, we in this country should aspire to an Australia in which all people have the capacity to participate fully in our democratic processes and in our society more broadly. It's important to recall that the recognition and protection of certain civil rights, particularly the right to equality, was a critical feature of the development of modern liberal democracy. This is evident in the theories about the relationship between the individual and the state, developed by intellectuals like Hobbes and Locke. They wrote that all human beings are equal in dignity. They valued the ideas of individual liberty and freedom, and argued that by virtue of these human characteristics, there should be limits to executive power. This was the beginning of the idea that legislative authority belongs to the united will of the people. And we continue to invest an enormous amount of power in our elected representatives, and to trust that they will exercise this power justly and broadly in accordance with their electoral mandate. The expression of majority rule through the regular elections is a critical element of democracy. But democracy is not just about the prevailing of the will of the majority. Majoritarianism, as some people call it, is not the same as democracy. A majority view is not always aware of, let alone sympathetic to, the need to treat fairly and justly those whose voices do not form a significant part of mainstream political discourse. Those I'm speaking of include Indigenous peoples, but also those who live outside our major cities, recently arrived immigrants, asylum seekers, children, the homeless, many people with disability, and those with lasting mental ill health and their carers. And we are learning that marked inequality is socially corrosive. This is a conclusion of British researchers who have found that when compared with countries that enjoy relative financial equality, countries where there is significant financial inequality experience mental health that can be 3 times more common, obesity rate that can be twice as high, rates of imprisonment that can be 8 times as high, and teenage births that can be 10 times as high. Importantly, this research shows that wealth disparity, rather than the actual level of GDP, is the critical thing. That is, equality within a country with a modest GDP results in better social outcomes than those achieved by countries with a higher GDP greater inequality. The United Kingdom's Equalities Review Panel argues that the links between equality and social cohesion are well documented. They say that violence, conflict, insecurity and political instability are all more likely to occur in more unequal societies. In the poorest areas of unequal societies, the quality of social relations and the social fabric are stretched to breaking point.